The Senior Rehab Podcast is sponsored by Health IQ. Health IQ is a special rate life insurance company for health-conscious people like you and me. If you're in the market for life insurance to have peace of mind and to protect your family, I'd highly recommend checking out this company. They are the only life insurance company to use data to leverage lower life insurance rates for active individuals. So the result is that 56% of Health IQ customers save between 4 to 33% on their life insurance premiums, which can definitely add up to big savings over time. To find out more information, just go to healthiq.com/SRP to support the show and to get your free quote. Hit me!
This is a Senior Rehab Podcast, the podcast for rehab clinicians that want to better serve older adults.
Hey y'all, this is Troy Mead with the Game Changers here, and we're talking about our monthly Game Changers meeting, and we're reviewing the article, Reliability and Validity of the Floor Transfer Test as a Measure of Readiness for Independent Living among older adults.
Woo!
Yeah. So I'm just going to give you a little background on the study, read the abstract, and give a summary. So this was a cross-sectional study, which was to determine the inter-rater reliability and validity of the floor transfer test as a practical alternative to several widely used yet time-consuming measures of physical disability, frailty, and functional mobility. So they had a total of 61 community-dwelling older adults, and they compared the floor transfer test to the physical functioning subscale, the phenotype of physical frailty scale, and the short physical performance battery test. And their conclusion was that the floor transfer test is a reliable and valid measure for screening for physical disability, frailty, and functional mobility. It can determine which older adults have physical disabilities and or functional dependence, and hence can be useful in assessment for readiness for independent living. And with that said, we all had a lot of discussion about this article. And to start us off, I think Nicole had a few good points. So Nicole, if you want to take it away.
So I want to talk a little bit about inclusion criteria, exclusion criteria, and some of the results they speculate on. So let's see. The participants met the following inclusion criteria: 65 years of age or more, cognitively intact based on the mini-mental exam, adequately proficient in English language, able to walk independently for at least 15 feet, and this is the important part, with or without assistive devices on a level surface, or requiring human assistance, including verbal cueing, supervision, standby assist, or hands-on assistance to prevent falling, and willingness to perform the floor transfer test. They were excluded if they had any conditions or diseases that can interfere, such as unstable angina, requiring supplemental oxygen, high blood pressure at time of data collection, body mass index greater than 35, severe pain. And then we had things like lower extremity amputation or use of prosthesis, when abdominal surgery procedures, and they didn't say if it was ever or recently, so I'm assuming any type of abdominal surgery were among the things that they exclude. Those are your inclusion criteria. Now, when you start reading how they did the test itself, one of the things they say under scoring was grabbing or reaching onto the principal investigator for support was scored as a failure. Makes sense. Then they say requiring physical assistance during the test to prevent a fall or compensate for unsteadiness was scored as a failure. Okay. But what did you do about people who had devices? Because you're saying you're including people who are using assistive devices. Did that count as assistance for unsteadiness or not? And then you're including people who may have needed handheld assistance. Are you automatically failing them, even though you included them in the study to begin with? So that's one of the first things that I stumbled upon. And when we got to the correlates, that was my next big issue here. So It said a statistically significant difference was found between the floor transfer test and physical disability status as categorized by the PFS. And what they're saying is adults who were independent in the floor transfer test were collectively those without physical disabilities, whereas older adults who were dependent in the test were those with physical disabilities. And my reaction to that was, like I said, no shit. Like, of course, you're failing people for having to have assistive devices, but you're including them in the test. You're already, like, why even bother including them? Mm-hmm. Obviously, they're going to fail because that's the criteria that you set. So
I feel like we should have one of the authors on these just to defend like their study, because I feel bad. I feel bad after a while.
I mean,
like one or two, and then they never come back. I think you make a good point about the. It seems like they got a diverse population when it comes to race and sex and marital status. When it comes to actual functional status, I don't think they got a real diverse population, especially for the claims that they're trying to validate in the test. One of my biggest issues about it was that when we're looking at frailty, there's a lot of different definitions, and you see one article. Each article that comes out, it kind of seems with frailty, they complain about how there's not a defined definition for frailty, and then they'll go and define it in a completely different way. So then there's never this finite definition. But for the most part, a lot of the articles that do try to go off an established definition, they usually use I find they use the Freed criteria. And that's one of the tests that they did, which I liked. But when they were comparing the other tests, I'm not sure that any of the other tests in the first place were validated for frailty. If they have, I haven't seen any of that documentation or research that they've been validated for other things, but not necessarily frailty, except for the phenotype of physical frailty scale. And again, if you're looking at that scale that Freen laid out, there's 3 different kind of cohorts. And when Freen separates them out, there's just one cohort that's just frail. And the 3 cohorts are frailty, comorbidity, and disability. And really with this cross-section of patients, they're really only getting that cross-section in this test that are disabled and or frail, and they're really leaving out the population that are frail and have just comorbidities. And off the top of my head, I can't think of each of the proportions, but I can think of the only one I know off the top of my head right now is it was like 26% of patients that demonstrated frailty and did not have any previous comorbidities or previous or demonstrated disabilities. So I think that was interesting that it was really just that one kind of cohort that they really were able to kind of show in this study, which I think that's hard to say that it screens for frailty if you're only showing patients that are frail and disabled, because you're not really showing the ones that are frail and are not disabled.
Yeah, so it definitely seems like there may be a more limited use of this than what the study is proclaiming in a lot of it. So I think for me, a few points that I was thinking about. So throughout the article, for people that read it, there's lots of comparisons to the other objective measures. So the SPPB, for example, and just referring to them as time, that these tests take a lot of time, that they were difficult to do in a quick manner. And when I read that, especially the SPPB, I found that kind of surprising, because from my perspective, I freaking love that test. Like I feel like it's very succinct. You get a whole lot of information for the limited amount of time that you have to commit to perform it. And it's just, it gives you a lot of information that will actually inform, your treatment plan. And so that almost, they were just kind of crapping on that a good bit, which, I wasn't sure why. Like, why, what is their incentive behind, those claims? I'm not sure. But so that was a consistent thing. But then in the conclusion, they said, furthermore, it may reduce the need for extensive assessment via other instruments. And I'm having to assume these other instruments are the ones that they compared to in the tests. And I feel I'm just not sure how those claims can be made when, if you watch someone get to the ground and get up from the ground, what does that show you? How much information do you get? How does that inform your treatment plan? And I just feel like, we still need to have this all-encompassing view of the patient and, really assess their specific deficits are contributing to how they're performing, that floor transfer test. So it's after reading this, like I really view it as, a good tool to have in the toolbox to be able to use in certain situations in conjunction with some of the other objective measures that we have that can give us some rock solid information that's actually going to inform our treatment plans. So that was a point. Another point that I think a lot of the home health therapists would, likely agree with, because, this test, there were, a few times where it was referenced as good for home health. I cannot think of many patients that I have where I would use this floor transfer test. Definitely an initial evaluation, but on, at the beginning of our course of care. Just when I think of the floor is a traumatic place for so many people, they haven't been on the ground sometimes for decades. It's a real challenging place. And for me to go into someone's home as a stranger to try and build therapeutic alliance and then, ask them to go onto the ground to a place that may be very fearful for them. I'm not going to do that. Like I'm going to wait. I'm going to, wait till the right time to where, I feel like it, they want to do it. They're trusting me and it's going to be, a good result. So I do like floor transfers in and of itself. That's a whole different story. Like I do feel like we need to be hitting that pretty hard with our patients, working with them, to work on their ability to get to the ground and to come up. But in terms of a floor test to assess, I think it's useful, but I don't think it's as useful or pertinent as what this article claims. So that's just my opinion. And now a quick break to tell you about our sponsor. This episode of the Senior Rehab Podcast is sponsored by Health IQ. I mentioned before that Health IQ is a special rate life insurance company for health-conscious people like you and me. They have a unique mortality model on health-conscious people that allows them to secure lower rates based on actual data. You can think of it like good driver savings on auto insurance. They also have a unique underwriting process where instead of using common measurements like BMI, they use waist-to-hip ratios, cholesterol calculations, and much more to demonstrate a more accurate view of someone's health. So if you're in the market for life insurance to protect your family and have a little bit of peace of mind, I highly encourage you to go to healthiq.com/SRP to get your free quote and help support the show. Thanks.
But we did talk about like the use in other settings and other, physical capacities. And, what about like community dwelling older adults that were maybe, a little younger or more high functioning, and how that can be really helpful to where it's not as, it's more realistic for them to perform this test in a, I guess, safer and a more confident manner. And that's where Erica comes in. So Erica, tell them about what you're going to be doing, because we were talking about how something that you're doing like this floor transfer test could be great for that type of population.
Yeah, absolutely. So I got basically hired by a rehab company, but that company is contracted with an accountable care organization. And the way that those companies make their money is by basically providing better care, by having less hospital readmissions, less falls, those types of things. So they contracted with the rehab company to basically perform home assessments and balance screens for community dwelling older adults under Medicare Part B services. So it'll be kind of like home health, except these patients will all be ambulatory. And so doing the balance screen and the basically fall assessment, fall risk assessment, will be able to determine which patients might be a good fit for physical therapy, which ones may benefit from community exercise classes, or maybe ones that don't really need any intervention at this time. And I think you're absolutely right. I think that floor transfer test is going to be, it could play a big role in determining, whether or not physical therapy is appropriate for them.
Yeah, identifying disability. Nicole, bring up the point you had about like the cultural differences and influences and what Laurel said.
Yeah, like it's almost seen as like rude to sit
you
on
little peasant sitting on the floor.
You're an adult, get up. And then you look at some of these studies, and I really got to find it, and it was just saying that, people who get on the floor more and more as they age or continue to get on the floor are less likely to fall, which makes sense because you're constantly using those muscles and going through that range of motion. It makes sense in your head. We'll see what they're like.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought it was very interesting to look at it more culturally and what would happen if we encouraged people from a younger age to continue to get on the floor or use it as a community screen with adults who are in, their early 60s and be like, hey, can you still get down to the floor? Do you still get down to the floor? Float it around, people who have young kids, get on the floor and play with your kids. Like, don't be afraid to do that. It's fine. Get on the ground. Mm-hmm. And Laurel, posted something great about a study looking at comparative religion cultural study in terms of the ability to get off the ground, thinking of Muslims who spend a good chunk of their lives praying on the ground 5 times a day. What does that fall risk look like? What does that fall rate look like amongst people who are culturally more likely to be on the ground versus, those in like America or other European cultures where it's not a thing we do?
In conclusion, I think everybody agrees that we don't quite agree with the claims that all the claims that the article made, but I think with like in Erica's line of work, what she's doing with the ACOs and to Nicole's point that this could be a screening tool that could be used in other settings, maybe not for frailty, but for other like for disabilities or other types of things as a primary, if you're going to put my population health hat on right now, as a primary prevention kind of tool to start working around that. So overall, it was okay.
Yeah.
Not too bad, not too good.
I think it's really good to have more, to really start more conversations about floor in general, like whether it's the test or the treatment, and just really working on those transfers, because it definitely seems like just the places I've been has not been a big emphasis from the therapy staff, thinking that, that would be valuable to address.
I'd like to see more work done around it. What I mean? I don't think the test needs to be thrown out. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, as they say. Mm-hmm. And not to say that this is a terrible article. I just don't quite agree with the claims that they made, but I think there's a lot of potential in the test itself.
Yeah.
I mean, I was harsh on the article, but in all seriousness, I see a lot of, like you're saying, a lot of potential for use of the test. And I really like the direction that our conversation took around this. I like the thoughts that were spun off this test and the article itself. And I feel like there's a lot of different ways you could go with this. So, even though I was like harsh on them for some of their things, there were some good things coming out of this.
Yeah.
Making lemonade out of lemons.
Hit me. Thank you for listening to the Senior Rehab Podcast. If you only listen to these podcast episodes, you are missing out on 90% of the Senior Rehab Project. Hop on over to seniorrehabproject.com where you can join the movement that's advancing care for older adults. You can join for free or become a part of the Game Changers where you can get some free gear and access to our monthly meetup. Just go to seniorrehabproject.com. I appreciate y'all, and I'll talk with you soon. But in the meantime, do not forget to stay funky.